One of these three coolants is quietly grinding your water pump to death from the inside, and it's the one millions of people pour in without a second thought. I lined up three the way owners actually buy them. The correct type for a modern engine, an old school green that used to be in everything, and a universal fits-all jug. They all look like coolant. They all keep the engine from overheating today. But one of them is abrasive enough to wear out the very pump that's circulating it, and another turns to sludge. The moment it meets what's already in your system, only one belongs in your truck. The one thing that actually matters. Here's what decides everything, and it's not the color, and it's not the brand, it's the chemistry, specifically the corrosion inhibitor package. Coolant does two jobs. It moves heat, and it protects the metal inside your engine from corroding. That second job is done by additives, and there are two main families. The old kind, called IAT, uses silicates and phosphates. The modern kind, OAT, uses organic acids instead. That difference sounds academic until you learn what silicates do to a water pump, and then it becomes the whole story. Here's the part nobody tells you at the parts counter. Silicates are abrasive. They're great at quickly coating metal to stop corrosion, which is why old engines full of steel and copper use them. But they physically scour the water pump seal every time the pump spins. In an engine designed for it, that's a managed trade-off. In a modern aluminum engine that was never meant to run silicate coolant, that abrasive additive is sandpaper running through your pump tens of thousands of times an hour. That's the silent killer, and it's hiding inside the most familiar jug on the shelf. The correct modern type. Start with the one that's right for a modern truck, the OAT or HOAT coolant that matches your engine's actual specification. Modern engines are full of aluminum and specific gasket and seal materials, and they're designed around organic acid corrosion protection that's silicate-free or very low silicate. That means no abrasive additive scouring the water pump seal, protection tuned to aluminum instead of old steel and copper, and a service life measured in years and 100,000 plus miles instead of the old 2-year cycle. Over a long interval, the correct coolant does exactly what you want, which is nothing you notice. Stable temperature, no sludge, no corrosion, and a water pump that lives its full life because nothing abrasive is running through it. The seal stays intact, the passages stay clear. This is the boring correct answer. The coolant that protects the pump instead of wearing it out, because its chemistry was actually matched to the engine it's living in. The other thing the correct coolant does that you never see is protect against electrolysis, the slow galvanic corrosion that happens when you have different metals sitting in fluid together, which is every modern engine. The right organic acid package forms a thin, self-repairing protective layer on the metal that stops that corrosion at the source. The wrong coolant or depleted coolant lets it run, and electrolysis will quietly eat gaskets, erode aluminum, and pit your water pump from the inside. It is invisible, it is slow, and the correct coolant is the only thing standing between your engine and years of it. And there is one more piece of the silicate story that hits F-150 owners specifically. The trucks people tow with run their cooling systems harder and hotter, and heat accelerates every bad thing coolant can do. It speeds up additive depletion, it speeds up the silicate dropout reaction, and it puts more thermal stress on the pump seal that the abrasive silicates are already wearing. So the towing owner who runs the wrong coolant gets a double dose, more heat driving, more chemical breakdown against a pump that is already working harder. If you tow, matching the correct coolant is not a nicety. It is the difference between a pump that survives the hot loaded miles and one that starts weeping right when you rely on it most. Quick one for the comments before I get to the dangerous jug, and I genuinely want to know, what color is the coolant in your truck right now? Green, orange, red, blue, or you have absolutely no idea? No shame if it's no idea, but drop it below, because in about 2 minutes you're going to want to go look, and I want to see how the colors break down across everyone watching. The old green that eats the pump. The second coolant is the old school green IAT, the stuff that was in everything for decades. Still sits on every shelf and is cheap enough that people grab it out of pure habit. And for the vehicles it was designed for, old iron and copper engines, it's fine. The problem is pouring it into a modern truck that never called for it, which happens constantly because green is familiar and nobody reads the spec. Two things go wrong, and both hit the water pump. First, those silicates are abrasive. Running silicate coolant through a modern pump wears the seal from the outside in, and a worn pump seal means a weeping leak and eventually a dead pump long before its time. Second, silicate coolant has a genuinely short life. The additives deplete in about 2 years or 30,000 miles, and when they're used up or the mix is too concentrated, the silicates can drop out of the solution into an abrasive gel, Literally green goo that clogs narrow radiator and heater core passages and accelerates wear on exactly the moving parts you need. So the old green isn't evil, it's just wrong for a modern engine, and wrong here means it's slowly sanding your water pump seal and setting a 2-year timer you probably won't remember. The person running green in a truck that specs OAT feels fine for a year or two, then starts seeing a small coolant leak at the pump, or a temperature needle that creeps on hot days and never connects it to the familiar jug they've been buying since the 90s. The pump didn't fail early by chance. The coolant wore it out. There is a reason the industry moved away from this stuff for modern engines, and it is not marketing. Silicate coolant needs replacing about every 2 years or 30,000 miles because the additives deplete fast, and almost nobody keeps that schedule. So the real-world outcome is not just abrasion, it is abrasion plus neglect. Old, depleted green coolant sitting in a system for 5 or 6 years, silicates dropping out into gel, corrosion protection long gone, quietly destroying the pump and clogging the radiator the whole time. The product practically requires a discipline most owners do not have, and then punishes them for not having it. Picture the driver the old green catches, because it is one of the most common stories in any garage. He is a careful, old-school owner who has been buying green antifreeze his whole life, the same jug his dad used, and he trusts it precisely because it is familiar. He puts it in his newer truck without a second thought, tops it off with more green over the years, and never once checks the manual because green has always just worked. Meanwhile, the silicates are slowly wearing the pump seal, and the additives are depleting on a 2-year clock he is not tracking. 5 years later, the pump starts weeping, and he blames bad luck or a cheap part, never the familiar jug that has been quietly sanding it down the whole time. The universal jug that turns to sludge. Then the one sold as the easy button, universal, or all makes all models coolant, usually dyed to look like it belongs anywhere, promising on the front that it mixes with any color already in your system. One jug fits everything, top off whenever. It's the coolant equivalent of a universal remote, and it fails for the same reason. Being compatible with everything means being perfectly matched to nothing. But here's the genuinely dangerous part, and it's chemistry, not opinion. The worst coolant mistake you can make is mixing incompatible types, and a universal jug encourages exactly that by telling you it's safe to pour on top of whatever's in there. When silicate-based IAT meets organic acid OAT, the two additive packages don't cooperate. They react and drop out of the liquid, forming a thick, gel-like sludge. That sludge is the real enemy. Your water pump then has to try to force that goo through the entire system, clogging the radiator, the heater core, and the narrow passages, while both additive packages neutralize each other and leave your metal unprotected. You get abrasion, clogging, and lost corrosion protection all at once. Even poured into a freshly flushed system, most universal coolants are an OAT compromise that isn't the exact match for engines needing a specific phosphate or silicate blend. Some Asian engines require phosphate-rich formulas and strictly forbid silicates to protect the pump seal. Some European engines need a specific low silicate blend. Universal can't be all of those at once. It's the most dangerous of the three because it's marketed to the person least likely to flush first or check a spec, the exact person who'll pour it on top of old green and unknowingly cook up a batch of sludge, and that kills the pump faster than either coolant would alone. Picture the driver this catches. Coolant looks a little low, so he grabs the universal jug off the shelf because it promised it mixes with anything and tops off the reservoir. Feels responsible. What he actually just did was introduce an incompatible chemistry into whatever was already in there, and somewhere in the system, those two additive packages are now reacting and dropping out into gel. Months later, the truck runs hot in traffic, or the heater stops blowing warm, and he is staring at a flushed-out system full of sludge and a failing water pump, having done nothing but a top-off he thought was harmless. The jug told him it was safe. The chemistry disagreed. It is worth understanding just how fast the incompatible mix reaction can turn on you, because it is not always gradual. When silicate IAT and organic acid, OAT meet in the wrong proportions, the inhibitors can drop out of solution and start forming gel relatively quickly, and that gel immediately begins reducing flow and heat transfer. So the failure mode is not always a slow, years-long wear. It can be a system that was fine last month and is running hot and gunked this month because someone topped off with the wrong thing. That speed is exactly why the do not mix rule is not cautious overkill. It is the single most important habit in cooling system maintenance. Let me explain what corrosion protection actually is in a cooling system, because it is the invisible job that decides everything. The inside of your engine and radiator is a mix of metals, aluminum, iron, sometimes copper and brass, all sitting in fluid, and that combination naturally wants to corrode through galvanic action, like a slow battery eating itself. coolant additives form a protective barrier on those metal surfaces to stop it. The old IAT does it with silicates and phosphates that coat everything quickly but wear out fast. The modern OAT does it with organic acids that build a thinner, longer-lasting, self-repairing layer. Match the right one to your engine metals and the protection holds for years. Use the wrong one and the barrier either wears out early or never properly forms, and the metal starts dissolving from the inside. Before I show you how to find your exact coolant spec in 10 seconds so you never gamble on this, hit subscribe, because a water pump job is never as cheap as the right jug. Here's a way to think about the water pump that makes all of this click. The water pump is the heart of your cooling system. It circulates the coolant through the engine and radiator, and it spins constantly whenever the engine runs. Millions of rotations over the life of the truck. Its seal is what keeps coolant in and lets the shaft spin smoothly. Now imagine running a mildly abrasive fluid past that seal on every one of those millions of rotations. That is what silicate coolant in the wrong engine does. It is not a dramatic single event. It is a slow grinding that shows up as a weep, then a drip, then a failure, long before the pump should have worn out. Protect the seal by keeping abrasives away from it, and the pump lives its full design life. How to buy the right one. Here's how you protect your water pump for the price of the correct jug. Ignore the color entirely. Color is marketing, not chemistry, and two coolants that look identical can be completely incompatible. Instead, find the spec your engine actually needs. Check the owner's manual, the sticker on the coolant reservoir, or under the hood, and look for a specification number, something like a Ford, GM, or Mopar spec code. Match that spec code to the coolant label. That's the entire decision, and it's the one thing that actually protects the pump. Here's the detail that makes the color system actively dangerous rather than just useless. Two coolants can be the same color and completely incompatible, or different colors and basically the same chemistry. Manufacturers dye coolant however they like, so orange from one brand can be a different formula than orange from another, and a green HOAT can be nothing like a green IAT. People treat color like a spec, matching orange to orange with total confidence and walk straight into an incompatible mix. Color is decoration. The only thing that tells you what is actually in the jug is the specification in the chemistry family on the label, and you have to read for those specifically. Two rules that save water pumps. 1. Never mix types. If you don't know what's in there, the safe move is a complete flush and refill with the correct coolant, not a top-off with something that might react. Topping off an unknown system with universal is how you make sludge. 2. Don't use tap water to top off or dilute. Tap water carries minerals that scale up the system and speed corrosion. Use distilled or a pre-mixed coolant. And respect the change interval. Old silicate green needs replacing around every 2 years, while a correct OAT can go many years and 100,000 plus miles. Match the spec, flush when in doubt, and the pump lives its full life. And a genuinely important safety and money note on flushing. If you inherit a truck or you honestly do not know what is in the cooling system, do not guess and top off. A proper flush removes the old coolant and any contamination and lets you refill with a known, correct chemistry so you're not stacking incompatible additives. It is a bit more work than a top-off, but it is the difference between starting clean with the right coolant and rolling the dice on a sludge reaction. When the history is unknown, flush and fill correct. It is cheap insurance on a pump. One more practical reality about modern trucks worth knowing. Many run extended life coolant from the factory that is genuinely good for years and a lot of miles, which is great until it lulls you into thinking coolant is a forever fluid. It is not. Even the best coolant eventually depletes its additives and needs replacing on the manufacturer's schedule, and the truck that has gone 100,000+ miles on its original fill is due, even if it looks fine in the reservoir. Check your interval, and when it is time, replace it with the correct spec rather than topping off the old stuff. Extended life means long, not infinite, and riding it too far lets protection quietly run out. Why the familiar jug is the trap. Here's the systemic thing this exposes. Coolant is the maintenance item people trust by color and habit more than any other. Green looks like antifreeze, so it must be antifreeze. The universal jug mixes with anything, so it must be safe. Both instincts are wrong, and both are actively marketed too. The familiar green is familiar precisely because it dominated for decades, which has nothing to do with whether it's right for the aluminum engine in your driveway today. Familiarity is a fact about history, not about your truck. The thing that makes coolant uniquely sneaky is that it is doing its most important job invisibly. You judge coolant by whether the temperature gauge is normal, but the gauge only tells you about heat transfer, not corrosion protection. A system can be holding perfect temperature while the wrong or depleted coolant quietly eats the pump seal and corrodes the metal. By the time the gauge finally moves, the damage that started months or years ago is done. The gauge is a lagging indicator of a problem that began long before it twitched, which is why matching the spec up front matters more than watching the needle. And the damage, like transmission fluid, is silent and slow. A worn pump seal doesn't announce itself. It weeps a little, then a little more, and the temperature creeps up on the hottest days first, which everyone blames on the weather. Sludge builds gradually in passages you can't see. By the time the pump fails or the engine runs hot enough to scare you, the coolant that caused it has been in there for years and nobody suspects the jug. The feedback that would tell you to stop arrives only after the expensive part is already dying. And this is the same pattern as every fluid on this channel. The products that hurt you are the ones sold on convenience and familiarity to people who were never taught the one spec that matters. Green wins on habit. Universal wins on the fantasy of one jug simplicity. Neither wins on being right for your engine, because being right for your engine requires matching a specification, and matching a specification is the one thing neither of those marketing angles wants you to stop and do. The correct coolant is boring, and boring is exactly why it protects the pump when the other two do not. So the real question was never green or orange and never a brand, because a dozen brands make a correct coolant for your spec. The real question is, does this jug match my engine's specification, and is it compatible with what's already in the system? Answer those two, and the color on the label stops mattering. You stop buying by habit and start buying by spec, which is the only kind of coolant that protects the pump instead of quietly grinding it down. Let me put the repair cost next to the coolant cost, because it reframes the whole decision. A water pump replacement on a modern truck, once you account for parts and the labor to get to it, commonly runs several $100s, and if the pump fails and lets the engine overheat, you can be looking at head gaskets or worse, which climbs into the thousands. The correct jug of coolant costs maybe $20 to $40, and a proper flush now and then is cheap. So the math is the same as everything else on this channel, a few tens of dollars done right, against hundreds or thousands done wrong. The coolant is the cheapest part in the entire cooling system, and the one that decides whether the expensive parts survive. And notice the tell that gives the universal jug away every time. It advertises what it is compatible with, not what it is approved for. Compatible is a soft word. That means it will not instantly explode when mixed. Approved or meet specification is a hard claim that the maker has tested and licensed the product to actually meet a specific standard. A jug bragging about the huge list of things it is compatible with in big letters on the front is telling you it is a compromise built for the shelf, not a formula built for your engine. Read for the hard spec claim, not the soft compatibility promise. And here's the same lesson this channel keeps landing on, in coolant form. The three most powerful forces steering your purchase, familiarity, convenience, and a low price, are all pulling you toward the wrong jug. Green is familiar, universal is convenient, and both are cheap and easy to grab. Not one of those three forces has anything to do with whether the coolant is right for your engine, which is a question only the specification can answer. Every time you let familiar, convenient, or cheap make the decision instead of the spec, you are letting marketing pick your coolant, and marketing does not have to pay for your water pump. You do. After lining up all three the way real owners buy them, here's the verdict. And it's not a color, it's a chemistry. The correct modern spec coolant is the only right answer. Silicate-free or low silicate protection matched to your aluminum engine, no abrasive scouring the pump, and a long service life. The old green IAT is the silent water pump killer in a modern truck. Its abrasive silicates wear the seal, and its short life turns to clogging gel if you forget it, and people run it for years on pure habit. And the universal jug is the most dangerous of the three because it invites the one mistake that instantly makes sludge, mixing incompatible types. And it's sold to exactly the person who'll pour it on top of whatever's already in there. The through line is the same as every test here. The familiar, convenient choice and the correct choice are almost never the same, and the gap hides until it's a repair bill. On coolant, that gap is a water pump and sometimes a whole cooling system full of sludge. Ignore the color, match the spec code, never mix types, and you'll retire the truck before you ever retire the pump. Now tell me in the comments, because this always gets people going. Has a water pump ever failed on you, and do you know what coolant was in the truck when it did? I want to see how many of the failure stories line up with the wrong coolant. Drop your year, your coolant color, and what happened. This is the kind of thread where everyone learns from everyone else's expensive mistakes. If you want the single simplest rule that keeps you safe through all of this, here it is. When in doubt, flush and fill with the exact coolant your manual specifies, and never top off with something whose chemistry you are not certain matches. That one habit sidesteps every trap in this video: the abrasion, the depletion, the sludge from mixing, all of it. It costs a little more effort than a lazy top-off, and it is the difference between a cooling system that quietly does its job for years and one that eats its own water pump while you are not looking. The one thing to take with you: coolant is a chemistry match, not a color choice. Find your spec code, never mix types, and never trust a jug that says it fits everything. Tell me what's in your truck right now and whether you even knew, because a lot of you are about to pop the hood and check. And next up, we're settling the rusted bolt war. Acetone versus WD-40 head to head, and one of them barely worked. Subscribe so you don't round off another bolt before you see it.